Step with us now beyond the veil of the familiar, where the echoes of the past hum with untold stories and forgotten wisdom. Every document, every artifact, every whispered memory holds a key not just to what happened, but to how we can truly know it. Unlocking these secrets requires curiosity, rigor, and, well, a willingness to challenge the surface. This journey of discovery is what we embark on together here on the All Sorts podcast.
Yeah.
To ensure you never miss a single step on these deep dives, make sure you've found and subscribed to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
That's right.
Liking and sharing really helps these stories reach more curious minds, helping us unlock even more doors to the past.
It does, absolutely.
And for glimpses behind the curtain, connections, and continuing the conversation, follow All Sorts podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads. We've explored so many fascinating topics in our previous deep dives, from ancient civilizations to modern science. We really encourage you to seek them out and listen. Each one is a new door waiting to be opened, a new puzzle to solve.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into the very foundations of how we understand the past. Historical sources, methods, and ethics. And this isn't just for academics, is it? It's really for anyone who wants to confidently navigate information and understand how we know what we know about history.
Exactly.
And frankly, how we evaluate claims about the world around us today.
Exactly. Our sources today give us a really comprehensive look at the essential techniques historians use, the often surprising challenges they face when evaluating evidence,
Right.
the ethical tightrope of using others' words responsibly, and even how technology is dramatically changing the field. We're pulling insights from, classic texts on historical method right up to modern discussions on fact verification and digital analysis. Our mission in this deep dive is, I think, to give you a blueprint for thinking like a historian critically, carefully, and with an eye for detail. This skill set is invaluable, equipping you to become better equipped to evaluate information about the past and really information in general. So let's start at the beginning. What is this historical method we're talking about?
At its heart, historical method is simply the structured way historians go about researching and writing histories. It's the collection of techniques and guidelines.
Okay.
You're pulling information from different places, secondary sources, which are others' interpretations, primary sources, which are from the time itself,
Right.
and even material evidence, like what archaeology uncovers. The real skill of the historian is taking all this disparate material, identifying it, evaluating its authority, how reliable is it, and then figuring out how to combine it all to build the most accurate picture possible of what happened.
And a core part of that process, maybe the core part, is something called source criticism, right? What does that involve?
That's right. It's absolutely central. Source criticism is the critical process of evaluating any information source you encounter. You're asking about its qualities. Is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it even relevant to your question? It's where you start questioning, everything.
I remember seeing this laid out really clearly in the sources. There's a classic framework, often called the 6 inquiries. What are those key questions you must ask about a source?
Yeah, Gilbert Garahan and Jean de Langlois formalized this. The 6 inquiries are: when was the source produced? The date. Where was it produced? Localization. By whom was it produced? Authorship. From what pre-existing material was it produced? That's analysis.
Right.
In what original form was it produced? Integrity. And, perhaps most importantly, what is the evidential value of its contents? Credibility.
Okay, so the first 5 feel like forensic questions about the source itself. Its date, location, author, influences, and whether it's complete or original. The source calls that external criticism, and its job is primarily negative, just saving you from using false evidence, making sure the source is actually what it claims to be.
Precisely. It's about authenticity and integrity.
Right.
Is this document really from the time and place claimed? Has it been altered?
Right.
The 6th inquiry, the evidential value or credibility, is where you shift to internal criticism. This is the positive function, though, about it. Okay, I have an authentic source. Now, how do I actually use the information within it? How reliable is this specific statement?
And Gottschalk makes a crucial point here that might seem obvious, but is often overlooked. You can't just say, okay, I trust this author, so everything they say is true.
Right.
No, absolutely not. You have to establish the credibility for each particular piece of information in a document separately. An author might be generally reliable, but they can still be mistaken or biased on specific details.
That's a critical insight. A source might be perfectly authentic, but the information it contains needs separate evaluation, always.
So, what happens when you have multiple sources and they contradict each other? This must happen all the time in historical work.
It does, constantly. There was an older procedure proposed by Bernheim, Langlois, and Signobos back in the 19th century that had a seemingly simple starting point. If all sources agree about an event, consider it proven.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface.
Right.
But the source immediately points out the huge flaw. Agreement doesn't equal truth. 5 sources, all copying the same single incorrect original source, will agree, but they're all still wrong.
Exactly. It built a kind of credulity into the process,
Yeah.
Their procedure did go on to suggest preferring sources with more authority, eyewitnesses, experts, favoring independent agreement, and using common sense. But that first step was a problem. Subsequent methods had to overcome that.
This is where those core reliability principles from Scandinavian historians come in, offering a more nuanced way to assess information, even from a single statement or source.
Right. They offer principles like recognizing that relics, physical evidence, like a fingerprint,
Yeah.
are generally more credible than narratives, which are statements or stories.
Okay.
Strong indications of originality in a source increase reliability.
And proximity matters. The closer a source is to the event in time and space, the more trust you can place in its description. An eyewitness is preferred over someone reporting what they heard secondhand, obviously.
Absolutely crucial is the idea of independent sources. If multiple sources that had no contact with each other contain the same message, the credibility of that message is strongly increased.
Right.
Independence is the key to confirming information beyond just a single line of transmission.
You also have to factor in bias, or what they call tendency. What was the source's motivation? You need to be aware of biases, minimize them, or ideally find sources with opposing biases to balance them out.
And if a witness or source has no direct personal interest in the outcome, their credibility is generally seen as higher. Makes sense.
Beyond just evaluating the content of a source, sometimes you need to determine if the source itself is authentic, or if it's a forgery, or has been altered. How do they do that?
Yes, historians have technical tools for that, the criteria of authenticity.
Yeah.
There are external criteria verifying authorship through other records, checking if independent copies of the document agree,
Okay.
and internal criteria looking at the formalities, the style, the language. Does it match other documents from that time and place? Are there inconsistencies in the timeline presented? They examine the text itself for signs of interpolations, insertions, or deletions made later.
Right.
These are the techniques used to separate the genuine article from something fabricated or manipulated.
This raises an important question. We rely so much on people telling us what they saw or heard. How do you really vet someone's account, specifically eyewitness testimony? It seems incredibly tricky.
It absolutely is. R.J. Schaefer developed a helpful checklist for evaluating eyewitness accounts. You start by asking if the real meaning might be different from the literal words used.
Right.
Is there irony? Are old words used with different meanings today? That sort of thing.
Then you look at the author's ability to observe. How good were their senses? Was their physical location suitable to see or hear what they're describing? Did they have the social ability? Did they understand the language, the context? Could they have been intimidated, affecting what they observed or reported?
Next, how and what was their ability to report? Were they biased? Did they have the right time, place, or even instruments to record accurately? Crucially, when did they report it relative to when it happened? Was it immediately after or many years later? Memory fades and changes,
Yeah. You also need to consider their intention and for whom they were reporting. Were they writing for a specific audience that might influence how they told the story? Are there clues to whether they were being truthful? Did they seem indifferent to the subject, making a lie less likely? Did they say something that actually made them look bad?
Yeah, self-damaging statements can be quite telling.
Or was the information just casually mentioned, not the main point? Casual, incidental information is often more reliable because it's less likely to be a deliberate fabrication.
And of course, do the statements seem inherently improbable? Do they go against known human nature or established facts? Remember, some types of information are just easier to observe and report accurately than others. Are there contradictions within the account itself?
Gottschalk adds a fascinating point. Even without corroboration, certain statements that are both incidental and probable are unlikely to be false.
Gotcha.
Like an ancient inscription mentioning a road built during Augustus's principate. You might question who exactly built it, but it's highly probable it was indeed built during Augustus's era if the inscription is authentic.
Okay, I see.
Or if a historical diary mentions buying a specific, obscure brand of coffee. The price might be wrong, The author might hate the coffee, but the existence of that brand at that time is probably true.
Right, the mundane details often ring true. What about oral tradition? That's another challenging source type. Can we ever rely on stories passed down through generations?
Well, Garrigan gives very strict conditions for accepting oral tradition as historically reliable. Very strict. He has two broad conditions. There needs to be an unbroken series of witnesses tracing back to the original event,
Hmm.
and ideally, several parallel and independent series of witnesses telling the same story.
And then 6 particular conditions. The tradition must report a public event of importance known to many. It must have been generally believed by people who lived around the time it happened.
Okay.
Must have gone without protest, even from people who would have wanted to deny it. It must be relatively limited in duration, maybe a maximum of 150 years in cultures known for good collective memory. A critical spirit must have been developed in that society, with means available to investigate claims. And crucially, critical-minded people at the time must not have challenged it. That's a very high bar.
It sounds like a very high bar indeed, making pure oral tradition pretty difficult to rely on for detailed historical facts.
Extremely difficult.
So historians are using all these techniques to evaluate individual pieces of evidence. Then they have to somehow put it all together, synthesize it into a coherent picture. This involves reasoning.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting. One of the primary ways historians do this, according to thinkers like C. Behan McCullough, is through the argument to the best explanation.
Okay.
You gather all your evaluated evidence, and you try to infer what must have happened to produce that evidence.
So you propose a hypothesis, a possible explanation for the events, and argue that it's the best explanation among all the possibilities you've considered.
Exactly. For this argument to be successful, your hypothesis needs to have greater explanatory scope, meaning it explains a wider variety of the observable data, and greater explanatory power, meaning it makes those observations more probable than other hypotheses do.
It also needs to be more plausible, supported by more accepted truths you already know, and less ad hoc. You shouldn't have to invent lots of new, unsupported assumptions just to make your hypothesis work.
And it should be disconfirmed by fewer accepted beliefs than competing hypotheses.
Right.
Ultimately, if one explanation has significantly greater scope and strength, explaining many and varied facts better than any rival, McCullough suggests it's likely to be true.
So it's about finding the story that makes the most sense of all the available clues.
Precisely. It's an inference.
Another form of reasoning mentioned is statistical inference, which is like a probabilistic syllogism. The VSLM tombstone example is classic.
Oh, yes.
You see those letters on a Roman tombstone. You know that in thousands of other Roman tombstone inscriptions, VSLM stands for Votum Solvit Libens Merito. He willingly, deservedly fulfilled his vow. Therefore, it's highly probable that on this tombstone, those letters stand for the same phrase.
It's a probabilistic conclusion based on frequency. Simple enough. Then there's argument from analogy. Thing A has properties P1 through Pn, and also Pn plus 1. Thing B has properties P1 through Pn, therefore B probably has property Pn plus 1.
But the source warns this has a significant limitation. Analogy alone isn't proof, is it?
No, not really. It's only sound if it's really a hidden statistical argument, or better phrased as an argument to the best explanation. It's best used to suggest potential hypotheses to investigate, not as a conclusive argument itself, more of a starting point.
It's clear these methods have been refined over time. How has the practice of history itself evolved? It wasn't always like this, presumably.
Well, you can go back to figures like Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century, who was remarkably ahead of his time. In his Muqaddimah, he didn't just record history, he analyzed how history should be studied.
Interesting.
He warned of 7 common mistakes historians make, and uniquely approached the past as something different from the present, needing interpretation based on its own context.
That's fascinating, recognizing cultural difference across time. That feels quite modern.
Yes, and he introduced principles for evaluation, stressing the need for experience alongside theory. He criticized idle superstition and uncritical acceptance, essentially laying groundwork for understanding the role of the state, communication, propaganda, and bias in shaping historical accounts.
Wow.
Some call him a father of historiography because he was thinking critically about the process of writing history.
Modern methods really developed in the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly in Europe. Then the 19th century saw this big debate. Was history a science or an art?
Yeah, that was a big one. Thinkers like Herbert Spencer saw history needing a scientific theory, and Henry Thomas Buckle dreamt of history becoming a science that could find fixed laws governing human events, much like physics.
Ambitious.
Very. But the most influential figure in terms of method was Leopold von Ranke, who championed a rigorous, source-based approach focused on establishing what really happened. Wie es eigentlich gewesen.
So he emphasized careful collection, objective examination, critical rigor. Sounds scientific.
It sounds like rigorous study, absolutely. But the sources point out that as Ranke and many historians after him practiced it, history isn't a science in the same way physics or chemistry is.
Why not?
Because it lacks that fundamental goal of searching out universal order, regularity, and formulating predictive laws. Historians are often more focused on the unique event, the specific context, rather than general laws.
Okay, that makes sense. And the 20th century brought more shifts, less focus on just grand nationalistic narratives.
Yes, more objective analysis of social and intellectual forces. A major trend was treating history more as a social science, drawing on disciplines like sociology, economics, and anthropology, figures like Brodall or Carr.
But you mentioned these multidisciplinary approaches didn't quite produce a unified theory of history.
No, not really. Unlike theories that came from outside the field, like Marxist historiography with its focus on historical materialism, the idea that material conditions drive society. The source notes, it's interesting how theories about history sometimes come from non-historians. Marx, for instance.
While others, like Hugh Trevor Roper, argued history was fundamentally an art, emphasizing the role of imagination in interpreting evidence.
Right. We also saw approaches focusing on formerly overlooked groups, ethnic, racial, socioeconomic histories, and Alltagsgeschichte, the history of everyday life, trying to capture the experiences of ordinary people. Very different angles.
And now, technology is changing things with digital history.
Absolutely. Using computers to ask new questions and generate digital scholarship. Modern practice still often starts in archives, physical or digital, building an argument from research, but the tools available are expanding rapidly.
And the perspective shifts, too.
Yeah, as John H. Arnold put it, history is an argument, a way of making sense of the past that inherently opens the possibility of seeing things differently, potentially leading to change.
Shifting gears now, let's talk about the ethical side of working with historical sources, especially using other people's words. This brings us to attribution and plagiarism.
This is fundamental to academic integrity and historical practice. Plagiarism is using someone else's words or ideas without proper acknowledgement. It's essentially intellectual theft.
Yeah.
And the consequences are severe academic failure, damaged reputation, even legal repercussions. You just don't do it.
When you're using someone's exact words, that's a direct quote, placed in quotation marks or indented. They're powerful tools. Why do we use them?
Direct quotes are used to support your arguments with concrete evidence, illustrate a specific point, preserve the original language or tone, or leverage the authority of a well-known figure. They can bring a voice from the past directly into your work.
But the sources stress using them sparingly only when they truly add value that paraphrasing or summarizing wouldn't.
Exactly. Don't overdo it.
And the absolute rule, always cite the source immediately, whether it's a footnote, endnote, or in-text citation, including a page number or URL if possible.
And it's crucial to remember that it's not just direct quotes that require citation. If you paraphrase, restate someone's idea in your own words while maintaining the original meaning or summarize, give a brief overview of main points, you must still cite the original source.
Right. The ideas aren't yours, even if the words are.
Precisely.
Why is this so important? Why attribute? Seems obvious, but let's spell it out.
It does several things. First and foremost, it acknowledges the original creator's work. Basic respect. It avoids plagiarism, protecting you ethically and legally. And it significantly enhances your own credibility and the quality of your work. It shows you've done your research and are building on the work of others. It shows your evidence.
The sources give great practical tips on incorporating direct quotes effectively, beyond just putting them in quotation marks and citing them. What else?
Yes, you need to understand why you're using that specific quote.
Yeah.
What unique value does it add? Then integrate it smoothly into your own writing. Don't just drop it in. Introduce it, give it context. Attribute it clearly, who said it, their credentials, where was it published.
And accuracy is key. Reproduce it exactly as it appears in the source. Use square brackets for any minor changes you make for clarity or grammar. Right?
Exactly. And most importantly, provide analysis. Don't let the quote speak for itself. Explain its significance, how it supports your argument, or why it's a telling example. Your interpretation is what makes the quote relevant to your point.
For longer quotes, there's special formatting called block quotes. When do you use those?
Generally for quotes exceeding a certain length, maybe 3 or 4 lines depending on the style guide, they're set off from your main text by indentation. It's a visual cue.
And the formatting rule I found surprising but logical. Generally, no quotation marks are needed for block quotes
Correct.
because the indentation already tells the reader it's a quote. Though there are exceptions like dialogue within the block quote poetry or if the block quote contains another quote.
Mm-hmm. And you still absolutely need to cite the block quote. That doesn't change, usually at the end of the block or in the sentence introducing it.
There are common pitfalls to avoid. Overquoting seems like a big one.
Definitely. Relying too much on quotes makes your own voice disappear and your writing feel disjointed, like a patchwork quilt of other people's words.
Right.
Another pitfall is quoting without integrating, just tossing quotes into paragraphs without connecting them to your ideas. And the most serious is quoting without citing. That's outright plagiarism, which requires a full citation in text and in your bibliography or reference list, always.
The source also connects this idea of leveraging direct quotes to broader communication, even talking about testimonials. How does that fit?
Yes, using testimonials is a direct application of leveraging someone else's words for credibility and trust, just like a historian might quote a key document or expert. Testimonials are powerful because they offer authentic validation from someone who's supposedly experienced something firsthand.
Like an eyewitness account in a historical sense. But you need to evaluate them critically too, right?
Exactly.
What was their bias, their ability to observe or report? Were they paid? Just because it's a direct quote doesn't make it automatically true or unbiased, whether it's a customer testimonial or a historical diary entry.
Exactly. You evaluate them using similar principles.
Mm-hmm.
Their authenticity is key. But you also need to consider their potential bias, their perspective, and whether their claim is specific and verifiable. Generic praise is weak. Specific, detailed accounts are stronger.
Uh-huh.
Just like a historian prefers a detailed primary source over a vague secondary one. Testimonials, historical or modern, are narratives used to validate claims, and they require critical analysis.
Okay, let's shift from using others' words to checking the facts themselves. The advice we constantly hear is don't just accept what you see, confirm it, verify it.
Right, but there's a fundamental problem. Confirm and verify are often used subjectively. There's no single, universally quantifiable standard for what counts as verified. As researchers, we have to be able to explain precisely how and why we consider something reliably confirmed.
Dictionary definitions don't help much for historical work, saying verification leads to an indisputable fact or relies on an authoritative act. Few historical facts are truly indisputable, and even authorities can disagree or be wrong.
Yeah, those definitions fall short. The sources offer a really insightful critique of common-sense approaches to verification. For example, just identifying a source isn't verification.
Right.
Evaluating a source's general reliability isn't verification of a specific facts within it. Cross-checking is good, but like we said, 5 sources copying one error still agree.
Yeah.
Lack of conflicting sources doesn't mean correctness. It might just mean limited evidence. Even consulting experts just tells you what they believe, and they might disagree. None of these alone verify the specific fact.
So what is true verification then? The source provides what it calls the evidence-explained blueprint. Sounds official.
It's a rigorous, structured approach needed. Step 1. Identify the specific assertion you are trying to verify. What exactly is the fact or claim? Is it immutable, a date, a name, or an interpretation? If a source is cited, does it actually exist, and does it really say what is attributed? Get specific.
Step 2 is research. You have to conduct reasonably exhaustive research. This means finding and examining all potentially relevant sources on that specific assertion. The source emphasizes that this is where verification truly begins in the depth and breadth of your search.
Step 3 is absolutely critical, and according to the source, where many verification efforts fail. Proving identity.
Oh, so.
Just finding a document with a name similar to your person of interest online and attaching it is not verification.
What?
You must rigorously prove that the person mentioned in the document is the same person you are researching, not someone else with the same name. That's harder than it sounds.
Let's look at the case studies from the source, because they perfectly illustrate this blueprint and its importance. Case 1 involves a distinguished historian researching a woman buried in 1863, identified as Mrs. Eliza Rachel, born in Texas in 1838, citing a census record showing an Elizabeth Rachel with the Henry Yeaters in 1860. Seems straightforward.
The verification process for the deep dive checked the census and confirmed the fact. And Elizabeth Rachel, born around 1838, was living with a Henry Jeter, slightly different spelling, in 1860. The census fact was correct.
Okay, but the crucial step 3, proving identity, failed. Why? What went wrong?
They went back to the original source for the burial, a diary written in French Creole. The editor of the Polish diary had misread the name. He said Madame Elise Rachel, not Madame Eliza Rachel. A subtle but crucial difference. And they'd misunderstood a local cultural custom. Mem, followed by a husband's given name, identified a married woman. Elise was a male saint's name, meaning the buried woman was the wife of someone named Elise Rachel. The burial record itself confirmed this, giving her age as 40, placing her birth around 1823, not 1838. Completely different person.
So the census fact was accurate, but the historian's identification linking that census record to the buried woman was totally wrong, based on misreading the name and misunderstanding cultural context. Verification didn't just fail, it actively disproved the assertion.
Exactly. It shows how a seemingly credible source, even a distinguished historian using citations, can be wrong if the underlying verification process isn't rigorous enough, especially on identity.
Case 2 is also eye-opening. A statement in a respected journal article claimed 2 Chitimacha women, Jeanne and Marie-Therese de la Grande-Terre, were sisters.
The article cited multiple sources for this claim, standard practice. But when the blueprint's research step was applied, checking those cited sources revealed they either contained no evidence for the sisterhood, or they themselves tracked back to original documents that also offered no support. The assertion of kinship, despite appearing in a peer-reviewed journal with citations, remained unverified because the chain of evidence didn't actually prove the link. It just sort of fizzled out.
This drives home the bottom line. Citations are not verification. They can be a starting point, maybe, but they can also be misleading if the cited material doesn't actually support the claim, or if the researcher hasn't done the work of verifying the details within the source and proving identities.
Absolutely. You must push back to the original source material and apply a rigorous process. It's a critical distinction, similar to the genealogical proof standard, which requires exhausting all relevant sources of resolving conflicts and writing a clear summation of how the conclusion was reached. Verification requires that level of rigor. It's hard work.
Now, let's shift gears one last time and look at how technology is impacting historical study. This brings us to text analysis in the digital age. What's this about?
This is where computational power meets historical sources. It's using computers to search, analyze, and visualize vast amounts of textual data that would be impossible to process manually. The foundational project, really the birth of digital humanities, was Roberto Busa's Index Thomisticus back in the 1940s, a massive, manually tagged index of Thomas Aquinas' works. Can you imagine?
Wow. The purpose, as Franco Moretti later articulated with his concept of distant reading, isn't to replace the traditional close reading of individual texts.
No, not at all.
But to allow us to examine thousands or millions of texts to find patterns, trends, and connections that would be missed by reading them one by one. How else could you possibly analyze that many books or documents?
Exactly. Text analysis reveals patterns in huge, corpora, large collections of digitized texts. Examples include sentiment analysis, where you can track the evolution of emotion in a series of novels, like the Harry Potter books, or analyze public mood and social media data over time.
Topic modeling is another cool application, identifying underlying themes or motifs from word clusters that frequently appear together.
Right. This can help you search vast digital archives by topic, even if the exact keywords aren't used, or trace how certain themes developed in a large body of work, like French Enlightenment texts. See the big picture.
And literature mapping sounds fascinating, recognizing geographical locations mentioned in texts.
Yeah, showing where novels are set or favorite locations by genre, and even combine that with sentiment to map, say, the mood of different parts of London as described in detective fiction, visualizing the data.
You find these texts in digital archives like Google Books or Project Gutenberg or specialized linguistic corpora. Then tools, often using natural language processing, help you crunch the data.
Mazarek University has fascinating projects, like Rapcore, analyzing Arabic expressions and social commentary in French rap lyrics over time.
Really?
or Caprati, a database comparing English plays and their Czech translations from before the mid-20th century, allowing scholars to study translation approaches and language evolution on a large scale.
So, distant reading and text analysis add a new dimension. They don't replace the historian's traditional skills of close reading and contextual analysis.
Not at all. Computers handle the quantity, the counting, the visualization of patterns. The historian or scholar still does the essential work of interpretation, providing context and asking the meaningful questions. These tools just offer a new perspective, allowing us to see large-scale trends invisible at the individual text level.
And digitalization in libraries is key to this.
Huge, preserving heritage and increasing accessibility for both traditional and digital research.
So what does all this mean? Thinking about the rigor of historical method, the challenges of source criticism, the absolute necessity of verification, and these exciting new tools, where does that leave us?
Well, I think it means that navigating information about the past, and indeed about the present, requires a constant critical eye. How easily might we accept a claim, even from a seemingly credible source with citations, without actually performing the fundamental work of verifying the underlying facts? It's easy to be complacent.
Think about the world we live in, flooded with information. The skills historians use identifying, improving identity, resolving contradictions between sources, understanding bias, rigorously verifying facts are more crucial now than ever, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. More crucial than ever. The tools evolve, from medieval monks copying text to modern algorithms scanning millions of digitized documents. But the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do we know with confidence what really happened or what is really true? That question never goes away.
It's a powerful reminder that understanding history isn't just about memorizing dates, it's about mastering the craft of knowing. It's a skill.
Absolutely. It's about building a robust understanding from the ground up, carefully evaluating each piece of evidence piece by piece.
Thanks for diving deep with us today into the fascinating world of historical methods and the art, maybe the science, maybe the craft of knowing.
My pleasure. It's crucial stuff.